What's up, guys? This is Zach with Top Deck Nation, and today we're going to be covering the top 8 decks from Seattle Regionals, which was recently held just a couple weeks ago. Now, if you are keeping up with the game, you'll know that this was the first Regionals, I believe, that Guardians Rising was legal. That's the new set that just dropped last month. So there's a lot of big changes in the metagame, the biggest being things like Garbodor, Fill Blower, Choice Band, a lot of big cards that really made an impact in the game. And honestly, I think this is probably one of the most influential sets we've ever had. Now, that said, this video is going to be pretty informal, just like the other videos. I did miss a couple of the regionals, so I do apologize about that, but I'm going to be kicking this type of video off again, starting with Seattle, and hopefully next week we'll have Wisconsin regionals up as well. And Wisconsin was really interesting because we saw a lot of crazy decks pop up, like Metagross. We saw the return of Vespiquen. We saw some other Stage 2 decks like Tapu Bulu with Vikavolt, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. We'll have it up next week. But we'll go ahead and kick this thing off. So first place, we had Sam Chen. He's a very well-known player. He's qualified for Worlds numerous times. He's won a lot of big tournaments. He's a very well-known player in the community, a very consistent player, if I had to choose one word. And Sam chose a deck that was pretty popular at the event. As you can see in the top 8 here, it looks like we have, I think, 6 out of the decks were Garbodor-based decks. It was just pretty crazy. I don't know the exact number, but I want to say like 26 or 28 of the top 32 decks at this regional were Garbodor decks. And so, as you could see, the format was kind of shaping up. We didn't really know what kind of decks were going to emerge out of the Guardians Rising format. Everyone had an idea of Garbodor, how to play it. But really after this tournament, we have a better idea of the deck as an archetype itself. So Sam played a variant featuring Drampa, and Drampa GX is pretty cool. It has 3 attacks here. The first attack is Righteous Edge. It is 20, and then it discards a special energy. So right off the bat, it's already really strong against things like Decidueye, really anything that plays special energy in general. It also has Berserk. It's doing 80 damage and then 70 more if one of your bench Pokemon has damage counters on it. So it's already doing 150 damage for 3 energy, but keep in mind with a Choice Band, it's doing a whopping 180, which is plenty enough to knock out most of your big EXs like Darkrai EX, Yveltal EX, Tapu Koko GX. So, I mean, a lot of outs here to do a bunch of big damage. And then finally, just for consistency's sake, Big Will GX, shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 10 cards. That is a whopping amount of cards, guys. I mean, that is, after a couple turns, that's practically like a fourth or like a third of your deck. And, even if your opponent decides to play an end to kind of counter that, I mean, you're still netting 6 cards there, right? I mean, it's basically saying shuffle your hand in your deck and draw 6 cards at the very end of your turn. So as we can see with cards like Tropical Beach in the expanded format, being able to do that at the end of your turn after putting some Pokemon down, it's already really, really powerful. So regardless, that GX attack is crazy good, and that's one reason why this deck is able to get set up really, really quickly. Now, in addition to Drampa, of course, we have the MVP of the deck, which is going to be Garbodor. Now, you probably won't be using it until mid to late game because your opponent may be, they might have a lot of items in their hand or in their deck. You want to wait until they have a decent chunk of those items in their discard because Trashalanche, Garbodor's attack, it is 20 times the number of item cards in their discard. So, for example, if your opponent has 10 items, 20 times 10 is 200, so it's going to be doing 200 damage. And with a Choice Band, that means it's going to be doing 230 damage. That's enough to knock out pretty much anything except for your big heavy hitters like Sagalio or Metagross. So Garbodor is just really a threat to deal with, and a lot of players, they just didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to expect, and so they were playing these really item reliant decks like Volcania and playing their Max Elixirs and Verse Seekers and Trainer Spells, and then Garbodor just kind of runs over those kind of decks because within a few turns Garbodor is already one-shotting pretty much all of their Pokemon. So just generally speaking, it's just incredibly strong, and we're probably sure to see more of it in the format. Maybe not so much now because of decks that have kind of popped up to counter it, but I do expect it to be at internationals for sure. And they also played the Garbotoxin Garbodor in these decks as well. So Garbotoxin, I should say, it shuts off all abilities as long as it has a toll on Garbodor. So, in this deck in particular, as you can see, we've got Choice Band, we've got Floatstone, so plenty of ways to put a toll on Garbodor. And so decks like Greninja and Volcanion, for instance, they're going to struggle big time against it because, their decks rely on abilities. I mean, you can play a couple Fill Blower and try to get around it, but, Fill Blower only goes so far when you play 6 tool cards. There's not really a way to counter every single tool card. So, pretty standard in this kind of deck. He also played a Tauros, which is pretty interesting. Tauros with Ninja Boy is a pretty deadly combo in this kind of deck. Tauros has this Mad Bull GX attack. That's what it's known for. And it does 30 times the number of damage counters on Tauros. So, for example, let's say my Drampa, gets damaged the first couple turns. It's got like 70 damage on it. Okay, I'm going to Tapu Lele. I'm going to use its ability to search out Ninja Boy. And then I'm going to Ninja Boy and turn Drampa into Tauros and use Mad Bull for like 210 damage. So crazy good. And then speaking of Tapu Lele, he played 3 Tapu Lele and no Shaman. That's another trend that we're really seeing with Guardians Rising. We're seeing that Shaman is seeing a decline in play because it doesn't really have a lot of HP, not really doing a lot of damage. Setup is a fantastic ability, don't get me wrong. We've used it for years, I think since 2014 or so. But you have to keep in mind, Shaman is just a liability once it's used. It can't really do much else. And, your opponent can take these cheap knockouts. Tapu Lele gets around that. You can actually take advantage of the GX attack here, Tapu Cure, to heal 2 of your Pokemon. So Tapu Cure is a great attack, resets the board, and, Tapu Lele is just a really strong Pokemon in general. And then finally, concluding his list here, we have Sudowoodo and Azelf. Sudowoodo is going to be limiting your opponent's bench to 4, so not quite as good as Parallel City, but really the only way to shut it off is like Silent Lab or Hex Maniac or something like that. So really hard to get around. So great against Pokemon that would normally just kind of one-shot your Drampas or something like that. So Volcanion is probably the biggest instance here, but also Mega Rayquaza as well. It's going to, effectively counter those decks. And I think we're going to see more Sudowoodo played in the future. And finally, we have Azelf. Now, Azelf was probably played because the Tapu Koko promo was not legal at this point. But Azelf, it puts 2 damage counters on each of your opponent's Pokemon that has damage counters on it. So, it's not quite as good, but it could be later on in the game. But I really like the Tapu Koko promo over this because it just spreads 20 damage without any kind of requirement or side effect or anything. It does need a DCE versus a Psychic Energy, but at the same time, I think with a Choice Band, Tapu Koko is doing 50 to the active and 20 everywhere on the bench, so I think it's just overall really stronger, and it's just it's also a free retreater as well, so that definitely matters. But that pretty much covers the Pokemon, guys. As far as things that kind of stand out in the deck, Pokemon Fan Club is one example of people taking advantage of Tapu Lele. We're going to be seeing a lot of one-of supporters that we haven't really seen before. And a Fan Club is one of those. Bridget is one of those, especially in decks like Metagross and Vikavolt, for example. It gets those basics out, so hopefully you can set up the Stage 1 and Stage 2s within a couple turns. We've also seen Teammates before as well. So, a lot of really interesting options. Tapu Lele, this one card is changing the format by storm. It's really enabling a lot of creative potential in these players and their decks. So it'll be pretty interesting to see what internationals will bring to the table. We also see Team Magma's Secret Base, and this is a card that really makes the deck work, in my opinion. What it does is it puts 20 damage on anything anytime you put a basic Pokemon down. So if I put a Trubbish down, it's going to be taking 20 damage. That sounds kind of bad until you look at Drompa's attacks. It's going to enable Drampa to hit 150 instead of 80 with Berserk, so really strong. And that's pretty much all I can say about it. It also works against your opponent as well, so it kind of sets up those cheap knockouts. But yeah, other than that, you have Choice Band and Rescue Stretcher as far as cards from this set. But that pretty much wraps up Sam's deck. So again, big congratulations to him. Now the format is going to be changing. Like I said, Guardians Rising is the new set right now. And so players are pretty much trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. How do we counter Garbodor? And we've already seen that with Wisconsin regionals. We've already seen people play less Verse Seeker, fewer Verse Seeker. They're playing like 2 or 3 now. I've even seen some decks playing 0 Verse Seeker. They're just kind of thickening up their counts. So for example, instead of playing 2 Lysander, which is pretty traditional, we're seeing like 4 Lysander, and that's pretty crazy. So that is a trend that I think will keep going through internationals. And as far as some other decks here, we have Jeffrey Chang. He played a Vesselkin Zoroark deck. Now, this is the deck that actually, maybe not card for card, but this is the list, or this is the deck that actually won this past weekend's Wisconsin Regionals. And you can check that video out on our channel. It was piloted by Michael Promowat, and he was also the 2016 European International Champion as well. So pretty big name player. You might know him from one of the players from the Top Cut from a few years ago with Kyle Pukasukovic, Drew Holton, and Ben Potter. So one of my favorite podcasts. I used to love watching their videos, their deck profiles, stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, this is one of those decks as well. Vesselkin Zoroark, very similar deck to what Michael played. And basically, if you haven't seen Vespiquen, the strategy is pretty simple. Be Revenge says it does 20 and then 10 more damage for each Pokemon on your opponent's discard. So, essentially the name of the game is putting a ton of Pokemon in your discard and doing a lot of damage. And so a few ways to do that. Unknown has this ability called Farewell Letter, lets you put it in the discard as soon as you play it, and it lets you draw a card, so not too bad. And then Klefki effectively lets you attach it as a tool card, so that's kind of different to one of your Pokemon, and at the end of your opponent's next turn, it gets discarded. So a pretty interesting addition here. When it came out, it really made Vespiquen a little more viable. And that's, those are the main ways to get it in the discard. But we also have, your Zoroark line is a secondary attacker with Mind Jack. It's doing more damage for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So especially good against these Skyfield decks like Rayquaza, just to name a few, maybe even Volcanion. With the Choice Band, especially Zoroark, it's really, really strong because if your opponent has a full bench, with a Choice Band, Zoroark is doing 190 damage, so that's enough to one-shot pretty much anything. And if you pair it up with like a Professor Kukui, for example, then you're doing 210 damage to knock out Megas. So really, really strong. But Jeffrey Chang's list here is pretty standard. The only Pokemon that kind of like stands out would be the Melodic, and Melodic has Sparkling Ripples as the ability. And it says that when you play it to evolve it, you can actually put a card from your discard into your hand. So as you can notice, he's not playing for Verse Seeker like the norm. So I'm guessing Melodic was there just to kind of recycle an item card so he could hold on to those. So he tried to counter around Garbodor. And so his deck honestly kind of foreshadowed the next week because a lot of players chose Vespiquen because of that. But otherwise, pretty standard list here. You've got your Rescue Stretcher and your Choice Band from the new set. But yeah, I mean, Jeffrey made second place, very solid list, very consistent list. He even has attackers such as Tauros, so it's kind of different. It looks like he kind of stuck to the 1 Tapu Lele and 2 Shaman, although that's kind of starting to shift and we're seeing more Tapu Lele. As far as our top 4 here, we've got 2 more Jampa Garbodor decks. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can look at the list for yourself. I'm just kind of looking at differences compared to Sam's list, and it looks like Brad's list is pretty similar, except we have Rainbow Energy, and it puts, if you don't know what Rainbow Energy does, it places a damage counter when you play it, but Rainbow Energy counts as every kind of energy. So it counts as like a water energy, a fire energy, whatever one energy that you are needing. And the great thing about Rainbow Energy is that it actually pairs nicely with Jampa because you can take advantage of that Berserk attack and damage something on your bench. So that's definitely a nice plus there. It's counting as a psychic energy, so you can use it with Tapu Lele, with Garbodor, whatever. It's just an extra added benefit, so I think it's pretty solid. We're also seeing Altar of the Moon. I'm not sure if Sam played this in his list or not, but Altar of the Moon has become one of my favorite cards of this set because it pairs so nicely with decks like Jampa Garbodor, like this one, Darkrai. There's actually a Darkrai Dragonair deck that plays 4 of this. Turbo Darkrai is playing 3 to 4 of this. It's just really, really strong. It's essentially giving free retreat to your Dark and Psychic Pokemon, or the Pokemon that has the energies on them. It's reducing it by 2, but most of the time, your attackers don't really have 3 retreat anyway. So just really strong stadium card, but otherwise pretty standard Jampa Garb list, I would think. And then Tyler Ninamura, we also see a Jampa Garb deck with Sudowoodo and Azelf. So this list actually looks pretty darn similar to Sam's. I'm not sure if it's the exact list. It looks like maybe a couple cards off, but we are seeing the Azelf, the Sudowoodo, stuff like that. So pretty close list to Sam's. Now, as far as the top 8 goes, we have Israel Sosa. He doesn't really need an introduction. He's won several regionals. It's pretty ridiculous. I think a couple seasons ago he won 3 in a row, and it was just pretty ridiculous. He had a dark patch deck with Darkrai, and it just dominated pretty much. And he really needs no introduction because he's a very consistent player and well known in the community. But he was playing a Lapras deck, it looks like, and this isn't the quad Lapras deck that we featured on our channel with James Arnold winning Virginia regionals. This is actually more of like a water toolbox deck. So basically, you have a bunch of these water type attackers. You get the energy on board with Max Elixir, with Aqua Patch, and then you just do a bunch of damage. And depending on what your opponent has, you can attack with something to fit that need. So for example, if my opponent's playing like Greninja or some kind of evolution deck, I can play Glaceon, and Glaceon's attack, Crystal Ray, says that it can't be touched by evolutions. So pretty good there if you're going against an evolution deck. But Lapras is your MVP of the deck. It's got Collect, so you can set up and draw 3 cards. It's got Blizzard Burn, which is doing 160. Now, it says you can't attack the next turn, but you can use Olympia or just any kind of switching effect in general to get around that. But with a Choice Band, it's doing 190 damage. And again, paired up with Professor Kukui, and you're doing 210. So that is a lot of damage. You're going to be one-shotting pretty much anything on the board. And you're also playing things like Olympia and Rough Seas, so you're going to be healing constantly. So it's really tough for your opponent to take knockouts. And in addition, it's also got Ice Beam GX. It's paralyzing and doing 100 damage. So this could be pretty effective against something like Jolteon EX, since you're playing all basics anyway. It'll paralyze the Jolteon so it can't use Flash Ray, and then you can just knock it out on the following turn. As far as some other stuff here, we've got Manaphy, gives your water energy guys free retreat with Aqua Tube, so it's pretty cool. And Articuno has this attack called Tri-Edge. Now it's doing 20 damage, and then you have to flip 3 coins, and it's doing 40 for each heads that you flip. Now with a Choice Band, this is really crazy good, because suddenly you're just say you do 100 damage to your opponent with Lapras, you can retreat out into Articuno, and suddenly you just need like 1 heads out of 3, and you'll be taking 3 prizes. So really strong play there. I'm curious why he didn't choose to play Ninja Boy in the deck, because I've seen a lot of people play it to kind of set up combos like this. But at the same time, I do see that he plays Energy Switch, so that's kind of an alternative, I would think. And you're not really playing Tauros anyway, so you don't really have to play that Ninja Boy. Now he's also playing Sudowoodo. He's playing a thick count of Tapu Lele, so he's really adapted his deck to this Guardians Rising format. Now it's interesting that he didn't really run into a lot of Garbodor, because I think he might have struggled because he plays a lot of items, as you can see here. But maybe he didn't run into them, or maybe he's just that good. Maybe he's able to play around all those Garbodor decks and make it to the top 8. Now, in addition, it looks like the final 3 decks here are Champa Garbodor, so I'm not going to really go over those too much. But we see a couple of the decks featuring Espeon. Now, I will go over that. Espeon is a really interesting GX because Eevee has this energy evolution ability. Basically, I can attach a psychic energy to Eevee and it'll automatically evolve into Espeon. So really good on your first turn. You can already confuse your opponent with Psybeam and then basically finish it off with Psychic. And I really like Divide GX, the GX attack. It says that you can spread 100 damage around any way you like. So against something like Vespiquen, for example, if your opponent has like 2 Combee out or a Combee and a Zoroa, you can spread the damage and knock both of those out, and then put a damage counter to somewhere else to kind of set up a knockout. So pretty good there. I noticed he's not really playing the Evolution variant. I've actually seen a variant playing Jolteon, Vaporeon, and Flareon, just so you cover all your weaknesses, and Garbodor essentially is doing double the damage against these guys. But, I'm guessing he figured he didn't really have to do that. He's got a nice consistent list here. So I don't really think he needed it, and it seems, was really successful. He outplayed hundreds of other players, made it to top 8, so definitely, good for him. And Kenny Wisdom, it looks like he was also playing Champa Garb. Again, very similar list to Sam's. The only differences I really see here are Team Flare Grunt, Delinquent, Bridget, Brock's Grit. So he took advantage of Tapu Lele and played a lot of these one-of supporters to kind of disrupt his opponent and do a lot of big damage there. But otherwise, mostly the same. It looks like Azelf was a pretty trending tech card because it just spreads damage. And Kenny's, pretty well-known person in the Pokemon community, not just because of a player standpoint. As you can see, he performs really well at these tournaments, but he's also a commentator as well at these events. So if you watch the Wisconsin regionals, you'll saw that he commentated with Puka and other players, Kyle Sablehouse. So I mean, a lot of big players. So and I think he even has a podcast as well. I want to think I think it's called Experience Share. I'm not really sure, but I think he does that as well. So he does a lot of stuff for the Pokemon community. And finally, just kind of ending the video is another Espeon Garbodor deck. Now, this one, it looks like, is the Evolution variant. So this one's really fun to play. I've played it before. Evolution's always really fun, getting all those guys out, doing double the damage, of course. And it looks like Warren actually opted to play a Giratina here. Now, for some reason, it's not showing up on the website. Maybe they haven't uploaded it, but I believe it's the Giratina promo. And the Giratina promo, basically, it has this ability that says, like, your Pokemon cannot be touched by breaks. I think it shuts off their abilities specifically. So really just an effective counter against something like Greninja Break. I don't really think we've seen any other breaks lately. Trevenant's not quite as good in standard anymore because the item lock one actually rotated out. So this was probably a tech for Greninja. And then just looking at the list, it looks like a pretty standard list for the most part after that. But that is going to wrap up the top 8 from Seattle Regionals, guys. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought. Are there any changes you would make to any of these deck lists going forward? Again, we will have the Wisconsin Regionals deck up, top 8 decks up, so be sure to look out for that in the near future. And, in addition to that, thanks so much for supporting the channel, guys. It means a whole lot to me. We're about to hit our 2-year anniversary in the next few weeks. So just, keep watching our videos and subscribe if you haven't already. We just passed 2,000 subscribers. It really just makes me overjoyed because, it does take a lot of work as a content creator. I know behind the scenes, when I first started out, I didn't think it would take a whole lot of work. I mean, how hard is it to push out a video, right? But it takes a lot of work. It takes several hours to push out a video. So I definitely have a greater appreciation for people such as Jwitz and other content creators out there. So yeah, that should wrap it up, guys. If you've enjoyed the video, give us a like. But in the meantime, this has been Zach with Top Deck Nation. Hope you enjoyed watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video as always.